Hi everyone, it's Mary from Joyful and Mary Quilting. Today I have a fun quilt block tutorial for you featuring half rectangle triangles, or HRTs. These versatile units paired with half square triangles and then a center square to bring it all together makes a 10.5 inch by 10.5 inch quilt block that I'm calling half of this and half of that. Half rectangle triangles, or HRTs, can add a dynamic modern twist to your quilt design, and in this tutorial I'm going to show you exactly how to cut, sew, and trim them so they fit perfectly in your blocks. It's not hard. And actually there's a free PDF to accompany this video. The link is in the description. So let's get started. So this is the block that we're going to be doing, and as you can see we have 4 half square triangles and 4 half rectangle triangles and then 1 center square. So half of this and half of that. Now I do have a free PDF if you're interested on how to make HRTs 2 at a time. The link is in the description. So first of all, we're going to get started. We're going to make the half rectangle triangles, and then we'll go ahead and make the half square triangles. Many of you know how to make half square triangles. That's not that difficult, but there are a few little tricks when it comes to making HRTs, and I'll show you that in the tutorial. Then when we assemble the block, we just sew this row together, this row together, this row together, and then attach them to each other, and you've got a 10.5 inch by 10.5 inch, half of this and half of that block. So first of all, let's talk about what we need for the block. We need a center 2.5 inch by 2.5 inch square. We also need, for our half rectangle triangles, we need 2 contrasting fabrics. We're going to have a light fabric and then a medium or dark, just as long as they contrast, you know, whatever works for you. These are measured at 3.5 by 5.5. So you'll need 2 3.5 by 5.5 of your darker fabric, 2 3.5 by 5.5 of your background or lighter fabric. Then for our half square triangles, we also need 4 squares, 2 light and 2 contrasting. I chose this dark one, and these are actually 5.5 inch by 5.5 inch squares. So we have 2 and 2. If you have the handout, or if you would like to download the handout, I walk you through all the steps creating half rectangle triangles. In this particular block, as you can see, our 4 rectangles, we have them all facing the same direction, which means we have the contrasting or darker fabric in the bottom left and the background or lighter fabric in the top right. And that's the same for all 4 of our rectangles. Now the handout, if you download the handout, I have instructions for actually creating the block in 2 different ways, 2 different directions. But for this particular block, they all go the same way. If you take a look at this rectangle, the dark contrasting fabric is in the top left, and then this one I've made it the opposite direction in the top right. You can assemble these in several different ways depending on what you do. They can go together this way to create more of a line of the lighter fabric. You can actually put them together, 2 rectangles that are facing the opposite direction, and create a fun point. Or you can do it this way, where you just have a dark and a light and a light and a dark and do something with your block. So they're very versatile, a lot that you can do. Again, this particular one, we are only going to use the half square rectangles that go in the same direction. So let's start out with our HRT fabric. Now, as you can see in the block, we are using this pink color and then this background color with the black dots. So I have 2 3.5 by 5.5 of this color and 2 3.5 by 5.5 of this fabric. We're going to turn over the lighter fabric, whichever is your lighter fabric, to the wrong side up, and we are going to mark a diagonal line from bottom left corner to top right corner. Now this is important that you do it in this direction with the smaller edge or the shorter edge at the top, because if you do it the opposite way, your points are going to face the opposite direction. And again, if you want one of each, then you can easily do the lines in opposite directions here, but we are going to make them all go the same direction. So I am going to draw a diagonal line from corner to corner, and then I am going to, that's my cutting line, I'm going to place my 1/4 inch marking on my ruler just to the left of that drawn line, right to the left, so that it's actually touching it. And I'm going to draw my sewing line on one side and my sewing line on the other side. You want to do that to both of these squares. You want them to be identical. So we're going to do our cutting line. Then we are going to do our 2 sewing lines, 1/4 of an inch on each side of that center corner to corner diagonal line. Okay, so we have this. Now, traditionally with half square triangles, you would just place your 2 squares right sides together, sew and cut apart. But this one is different. You have to place them a little differently when you are putting them together. So what we're going to do is take our darker or contrasting fabric, we're going to place those right side up. This is really important that these are right side up. And this is the interesting part. We're going to take that marked piece and we're going to line up this corner, the top right, with the top left of this corner. So it's going to go right there. And then the bottom, same thing. We're going to line up that bottom corner, the bottom left corner, with the bottom right corner of our contrasting fabric. So you'll just put these 2 pieces. My line is right there, intersecting that corner, and same thing at the top. Now I'm just going to use a little pin in there to hold it in place when I sew, because it is at a rather skewed angle. Now it looks like it's not going to come out right, but it is. It will come out right. So we'll do that to this one, and the same thing here. We're going to make sure that those diagonal corner to corner lines hit right at the corner of that contrasting fabric rectangle. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to sew on the 2 outside lines, which are our sewing lines. So there I have them sewn together. You can see that I've got them corner to corner. That's going to give me 1, 2, 3, 4 half rectangle triangles. Now, let's cut them in half right on that center diagonal line. That gives us 2, and then this gives us 2 more. We're going to press toward the darker fabric. Now the only time you wouldn't is if you're nesting seams somehow in your block and you'll want to plan for that. But for this particular block, we're good just pressing in this direction. Now I am going to use my pressing marker just to make sure that everything is nice and flat. So I'm going to paint those seams with my pressing marker. There's a link to the pressing marker in the description if you're interested. I just use Terriel Magic pressing solution. You can use Mary Ellen's Best Press, whatever you like. You fill it up. It's just an empty paint marker that I've put pressing solution in. And this helps me to get nice flat seams. I use it all the time for all of my blocks. Then we're going to press to one side. And usually I just press until that pressing solution is dry. Just a couple of seconds, it dries quickly. So there's 2. There's 3. And there's 4. Now we have to trim these up. They're not good just like this. And the important part is the top. Now if you take a look at my cut rectangle, there's a tiny bit. It's 1/8 of an inch at the top and at the bottom. This is why we have to do some trimming, because in order to get these blocks to fit properly at a 1/4 inch seam, which is going to be right there where we match our various units, you've got to have that little extra right here and right here. So I'm going to show you how to get that. Before we can even do that, we have to prepare our ruler. So I'm going to show you with 2 different rulers. What we want to do is we want to mark the space of our 2.5 inch by 4.5 inch unit, because that's what this is going to end up being. We mark that just so we don't get off track. You can do it with a bigger ruler. This is my Omni Grid that I marked. I'm going to show you with my Creative Grids ruler. It's just a little bit smaller. So first of all, I'm going to show you how we mark our ruler. The first thing we want to do is we want to place pieces of tape. You can use washi tape. I just used painter's tape. And I cut off a piece that I will place right on that 2.5 inch line. You can see my 2.5 inch line just peeking out from underneath it. And then I will place another one on the 4.5 inch line so that I've got a rectangle right here that's 2.5 inches by 4.5 inch. Now here's the key. What you need to do in addition to that is you need to mark the points that I have marked here. I just used a black thin Sharpie marker. Now you're thinking I'm going to wreck my ruler. No, you're not, because when you're done, if you want to remove it, you can just use one of these magic erasers. There's generic ones, buy them at the grocery store, and it will take off any permanent marking that you've put on your ruler, so you don't have to worry about it doing any damage. When you are marking it, the points that you want to mark, and I've marked the 4 points on my ruler because I actually made a block where I had 2 alternating rectangles. For this one, you need to mark the 2.25 point right there by 1/4. So it's 2.25 over, 1/4 down, and then you also want to mark over here your 4.25 by 1/4. So 4.25 inches down, 1/4 inch over, and I just put a little dot there and a little dot here. Now you can do the opposite once again if you're doing opposite HRTs. So those points are going to be really important when we line up our half rectangle triangles. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to get ready to cut. So I'm going to take this HRT and I am going to line up that mark that I made, that black mark. It's going to be lined up on the diagonal seam. But you want to make sure that you don't have any space here. So you've got to adjust your ruler in order to make sure that all the area is covered and ready to be cut. So can you do it this way? No, it gets skewed a little bit, just like this. It looks silly, but I'm telling you, it works. What you want to make sure is that at this very top right here, you've got 1/8 of an inch. That's why you need a ruler that has 1/8 of an inch marking on it. So here's my 1/8 of an inch, here's my 1/4, and that 1/4 is lined up right on the diagonal line. So that's the second check. The third check is down here. We want to just tip it just enough that that point that we drew here goes right through that line. And then I actually marked on my tape 1/8 of an inch over because they can't really see it since it's usually at the end of the ruler. So I marked it right there. So I know that that little mark that I made right here is 1/8 of an inch over. That's where I also want to line up my diagonal seam of my half square rectangle. Now check all over before you cut. Make sure there's no empty space here. You don't want to see your cutting mat. You want to make sure there's fabric underneath all of these, and then we're going to go ahead and we're going to trim this side. So there's one. Now that we've trimmed this, we don't really have to do any lining up because we know that this side is trimmed right. So we're going to just place the ruler where our 2.5 by 4.5 inch markings are. Again, you can double check because you can see there's my 1/8, there's my 1/4 inch going right through that diagonal line. Here's my 1/4 inch dot also going through it, and my 1/8 inch lines up just right. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cut again. And when you look, there we go. We have a perfect half rectangle triangle. Now again, you're going to need 4 of these, so you're going to want to trim one more. Let's just go through the process one more time. We place this, and then we're going to line up that 1/4 inch dot, our 1/8 inch marking, tip it, make sure that, oopsie, we've got some space there. We don't want that. So we have to move it up just a little bit. That looks pretty good. Our dot is there. Our 1/8 is lined up. Our 1/8 is lined up. Our dot is on the line. So let's go ahead and trim that one. Flip it around. Make sure that everything is lined up once again. My 1/8 inch, my 1/8 inch, my 1/4 dot is on the diagonal line. You don't want to make that dot too big on your ruler because you want to make sure that you're accurately cutting. And there we go. So now we have our rectangles made for this particular block. 1, and they're all going the same direction, 2, 3, and 4. So let's set those aside and make our half square triangles. Triangles are the easy ones. I showed you the more difficult one. The half square triangles, we are just going to make 2 at a time. The reason we're doing that is because when you do the 4 at a time method, many people recommend that, where you sew all the way around the edge and then cut on the diagonal, you've got bias edges on every edge of your block. And you really don't want that, because if you've got your block here, you don't want a bias edge here. That produces too much stretch. So this way, when you do the 2 at a time, everything has the straight of grain, or the width, on your block. So we are going to take our background fabric, wrong side up. I have one marked already, and we'll mark this one. We're going to draw, just like we did with the half square rectangles, we're going to draw that diagonal line, corner to corner. Move our ruler so that we have that center diagonal line positioned. Then we're going to do the same thing on this side. Mark the opposite seam line. And just like I did here, we're going to place right sides together and pin this one as well. So now you can see from this, we're going to get 1, 2, 3, 4, the other 4 half square triangles. So let's go ahead and sew on those sewing lines, the outside lines, the 2 lines on either side of that center diagonal line. So there we have our seams all sewn. We're going to remove our pins, and we're going to cut apart the 2 half square triangles, just like we did the rectangles. So we're going to take this right on that center diagonal line, that's our cutting line, and we're going to press toward the darker fabric. Since I'm pressing towards the darker fabric, I'm going to put the dark side up, and again I'm going to use my pressing solution and my pressing marker and just mark those seams so that I get a nice flat seam. Now when I trim these up, I'm going to use my block lock ruler. You don't have to, you can just use a square ruler, whatever works best for you. I just find the block lock to be really easy, so that's why I use it. But again, you know, whatever works for you, a square ruler, as long as you have a diagonal line on the square ruler that you can line your seam up, your diagonal seam, and then cut, it will also work. No need to buy extra tools. So there I have all of my pressed squares. Now I will show you, if you don't have a block lock, this is the diagonal line I was talking about. We want these to be 4.5 inch square. So I'm going to line up, make sure that you've got my 4.5 is here so it's not off the edge. And you just have to be really careful because the rulers can slip and slide. So don't push against it while you're cutting. And then we'll just flip it around. Do the same thing here, line up our 4.5 with our 4.5 and cut. Now, that's one way. The other way is to take a block lock ruler, which has this nice little ridge in here, and it locks against the seam. So you want to make sure it's in the right direction. You can see this is a 4.5 inch. They come 6.5 inch, 4.5 inch, 2.5 inch, all sizes, 5.5. But I want it lined up here, and then when I cut, I don't have to worry about it moving. It stays where I put the ruler. Turn it this direction, line up these edges. So whatever method you use, you know, whatever you're going to use to cut these to trim them to 4.5 inches is absolutely fine. So there I have my 4 trimmed half square triangles. So we have all of our pieces that we need for this block. We have our center 2.5-inch square. We have our half square rectangles, 4 of those, all going the same direction, and we have our half square triangles, 4 of those. So when we put those together, beginning with our half square triangles, we've got 1, we want the background or light fabric to go to the outside in the corners. So we just want to make sure we do that. Remember, the block is going to be 10.5 inches. Once we have these lined up, we're going to, of course, our little center square goes right there. And then we're going to piece, we want the point down at the bottom. We're going to piece these just like this. So this is how it's going to go together. I always like to lay it out just to make sure that I have everything looking right before I sew it together. You don't want to have one flipped and then you've got a problem. So there's our arrangement. We're going to sew this piece to this one to this one. That's going to be our first row. We're going to sew this to this to this. That's going to be our second row. And then the same thing here. Now, which direction do we press? These actually will be pressed toward this dark square. So you're going to press these out, and then these will be pressed in toward the center. That way you'll be able to nest these corners, these intersections, when you assemble the entire block. And there's our finished block. We've put everything together, we've sewn the rows together, then we've attached the rows to each other, and we have our half of this, half of that 10.5 inch by 10.5 inch block. And there you have it. Beautiful, crisp, half rectangle triangles, HRTs, that are ready to be stitched into your quilt block. The key is to remember that HRTs are directional, so always double check your pattern before drawing your lines. And if your block calls for mirrored shapes, you'll need to make a set that goes in each direction. If you try this half of this and half of that block, I'd love to see it. So tag me so I can cheer you on. And don't forget to download your free PDF for this block. If you found this tutorial helpful, please like this video and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss future quilting tips, techniques, and projects. As always, I am always trying to be joyful, but I will always be merry. Thanks so much for watching.